ask me about my father, John Adams, who died last year. I respect him more than any other man I know. People know of his work as a president, but his skill as a debater and service as a diplomat is often overlooked. In 1778, he received a commission from Congress to join Benjamin Franklin and Arthur Lee in France to negotiate an alliance. My father accepted the commission to do what he felt was his duty to his country. His great services to his country during these next 5 years would help secure victory over Britain, would help set the new United States of America on its feet. His role in Paris and Holland was profound. His efforts at increasing French naval support would help lead America to victory. The loan he obtained from the Dutch would establish American currency in Europe and poured much-needed money into America's new debt-ridden government. And finally, his uncompromising efforts at the Treaty of Paris would give his new nation its fullest powers and rights. His level of self-sacrifice will never be surpassed. His dogged determination and rather undiplomatic pointedness set him up for some failures, but ultimately led to success. But I'm getting ahead of myself. As I said, in 1778, my father left for Paris, and he took me with him. I was 10 years old. I have been in France for a year now, and have got nothing done since I arrived. As soon as I got here, I learned from Franklin that the French had already signed an alliance with America. I wonder why I was even here. I spend all my time either organizing the financial papers of the embassy, which are in a horrible disarray, or playing the part of mediator in all the feuds between Franklin and Arthur Lee. A month after my arrival, I was finally given an audience with the king. But when I told him I spoke no French, he replied in 3 words, "Pas un mot," not a word, and that was it. I sent a letter to the French foreign minister, the Comte de Vergennes, saying that nothing would bring the war to a more speedy conclusion than sending a powerful fleet, sufficient to secure naval superiority. Such a naval force, acting in concert with the armies of the United States, would, in all probability, take and destroy the whole British power in that part of the world. Vergennes, however, ignored my letter completely. I feel useless and desire to go home. I will write a letter to Congress, advising them to disband the 3-man commission in France, as there is nothing for us to do at the present. Congress took my father's advice and appointed Franklin as the lone diplomat to remain in Paris. We were so happy to be home again, and I had especially missed my mother and my brother Charles. The war seemed to be in a stalemate, and the British held New York again. In October, my father received a commission from Congress to return to France in the likelihood that Britain would be willing to negotiate a treaty of peace and commerce. The voyage was rough, and the ship was forced to land in Spain. My father, being the determined man he was, chose not to wait in Spain till the ship was fixed, but instead we journeyed by foot over the Pyrenees toward France. We reached Paris, travel-worn from our 2-month journey. The British, however, were not willing to begin discussions on peace. My father, being aware of the need in America for greater French naval support, continued to press Vergennes on this matter. Vergennes did not even respond. My father wrote that Vergennes' policy toward America was to keep his hand under our chin to prevent us from drowning, but not to lift our heads out of the water. Vergennes and my father did not see eye to eye on the nature of the Franco-American alliance. My father viewed it as an alliance between 2 equal powers. Vergennes, on the other hand, did not. He grew tired of my father and severed the communication between the 2 of them. He then reported to Franklin, who scathingly criticized my father in a letter to Congress for giving extreme offense to the court. My father was being unjustly criticized by foreign dignitaries, his Congress, and even his fellow diplomats. He may have been a little headstrong, but his goal was to see his country achieve independence. After communication with Vergennes was severed, my father left for Holland to see if something might be done to render us less dependent on France. The Dutch had been smuggling arms to America, and yet they still had close ties to Great Britain, since William V, Prince of Orange, was related to the British king. Also, the Dutch had a treaty with Britain and many financial connections. After being in the Netherlands for 5 months, my father had still not met with the government official, and his optimism began to fade. Ah, 1781 looks very bleak for America. Benedict Arnold has committed treason. The British have been continuously winning in the South. Congress and the Army will not cooperate. Congress has no money, but they continue to write checks on an imaginary balance. And I have failed in getting a loan from the Dutch. Our government will collapse if we do not get more money. The French are thinking of annulling our alliance, that, as they feel, will tie them to a cause that is doomed. I am too impatient. I will not wait for this petty Dutch government any longer. It may be against the rules of diplomacy, but I will send a declaration affirming our determination to settle only for independence. They must see that if ever there is a natural alliance between two countries, it is between the United States and the Netherlands. While waiting for a response to his bold request, my father was summoned to Paris by Vergennes to take part in peace discussions with Austria and Russia. In this settlement, the colonies would have to accept a long-term truce based on the war map at the beginning of negotiations. As it stood, America would have lost almost half of its land. My father refused this armistice proposal and wrote a letter to Vergennes reminding him that America was guaranteed a just claim to sovereignty in their alliance and that France should help establish the new nation. My father's actions saved American independence from being robbed by European powers. In late July, he returned to Amsterdam. After fighting severe illness and despondency over America's prospects, he received the news on November 23rd of America's glorious victory at Yorktown and the surrender of General Cornwallis. He was elated to hear that French naval support had played a key role in the battle, as he had pushed this with Vergennes for 3 years and had finally been carried out. Seeing the timing was right, my father went to the Dutch government to demand a categorical response to his memorial. After much debate, the Dutch recognized American independence and acknowledged my father as the U.S. ambassador. Then, in June, he received the much-needed loan from Dutch bankers. My father's work in Holland was a great success. If he had delayed action and followed the rules of conventional diplomacy, Holland would have most likely signed a separate peace with British against America. Then, in October, my father signed a treaty of commerce with the Dutch, and his successful, persistent work was over. In September 1782, my father received a letter from John Jay asking him to come to Paris, because the British were willing to begin discussions on peace. The other two Americans in the commission were Jay and Franklin. Thankfully, they chose to ignore Congress's preposterous orders to let the French determine the terms of the treaty. On October 30th, they began formal negotiations with the British. Yes, Father's determination again would gain him the victory. The British diplomats were no match for the skill of Jay, Franklin, and my father. On every point of contention, they got their way. On November 30th, 1782, the preliminary treaty was signed without any consent or advice from the French. A year later, on September 3rd, 1783, the revolution was over and the new nation began with the signing of the final treaty. The first sentence stated, "His Britannic Majesty acknowledges the said United States to be free, sovereign, and independent states." You may think I am biased because he is my father, but there are other people who praise my father's success, some of whom even disliked him. The Spanish ambassador said that my father had struck the greatest blow that has been struck in the American cause, and the most decisive. On father's success in Holland, even Vergennes said, "You have shown in Holland that Americans understand negotiation as well as war." Dr. Franklin described my father in words that should never be forgotten. "He means well for his country, is always an honest man, often a wise one, but sometimes, and in some cases, absolutely out of his senses." If my father was truly out of his senses, then our nation would be far better off with more men out of their senses.